Chapter 10 A Frightened Puppy. "Where should we start looking?" James said. Mandy bit her lip. "I don't know," she said. "I only hope he hasn't managed to get out of the playground." James looked worried. "Maybe he's hiding somewhere." Mandy nodded. "If he's scared, that's probably what he'd do," she said. "Well, he isn't behind the garbage cans," James said. Mandy's eyes went to the corner of the yard. There was a heap of old floorboards and shelves piled up against the side of the bicycle shed. The workmen had put them there when they were working on the school. "Look at all that stuff the workmen are throwing out," she said. "You don't think he could have crawled in there?" "We could check," said James. Mandy and James ran over to the pile of wooden planks. "Oh, I do hope he isn't in there," Mandy said. "It doesn't look safe at all." "Listen," said James. "Do you hear something?" Mandy shook her head. "I'm sure I heard a sound," said James. Then Mandy heard it too, a tiny squeak, but it wasn't coming from inside the pile of wood. She frowned. "It sounds like it's coming from up there." She pointed to the top of the pile. James looked up, just as a small black face appeared over the edge. "There he is!" said Mandy. James swallowed. "But how on earth did he get all the way up there?" he said. "Frightened animals do the strangest things," Mandy said. The puppy looked down at them. He put out a paw. The board he was standing on tipped forward slightly. "Oh, no," said Mandy, her breath catching in her throat. "Go back!" James called to the puppy, gesturing with his hands. The puppy backed off a little, but soon stepped forward again, scrambling at the edge of the board. He barked down at them. "He's frightened," said Mandy. "He wants to come down." "But that plank doesn't look too steady," said James. "If it tips over, he'll fall right into the middle of the pile. He'll get hurt." Mandy frowned. She looked at the pile of wood. It was built up against the corner of the bike shed, where it met the wall that ran around the schoolyard. The puppy had backed away to the far side of the pile, almost against the wall. "What are you thinking?" asked James. Mandy looked at the sloping roof of the shed. "If I could get onto the roof, I could walk along the wall and try to reach him," she said. James looked at the wall that ran along behind the shed. "But it's too narrow," he said. "You'd fall. We better try and get help." Just then the puppy put out a paw, and the plank he was on rocked dangerously. "There isn't time," Mandy said. "You've got to help me, James. I can't get up on the roof on my own." James looked doubtful. "Don't worry," said Mandy. "I'll be really careful." "All right," James said. Mandy walked toward the shed, and James came after her. "Cup your hands," said Mandy. "Then I can stand on them and climb up onto the roof." Mandy put her foot into James's cupped hands. "Now lift," she said as she pushed herself up. James pushed, and Mandy grabbed the edge of the shed roof. For a moment, she thought she was going to fall. Then she got a grip on it and heaved herself up. "So far, so good," she said as she wriggled her way onto the roof. She looked down at James. "Be careful," he pleaded. Mandy smiled. "Oh, I will be," she said. "If I'm not careful, I won't be able to rescue the puppy." Then she walked across the roof and onto the wall. Slowly, carefully, she balanced her way along the wall until she was just opposite the puppy. He turned his big brown eyes toward her. "It's all right," she said to the puppy. "Nobody is going to hurt you. Come to Mandy." The puppy looked at her. He was quivering with fright. Mandy held her hand out to him, speaking softly but firmly. The little dog began to edge toward her along the plank, away from the dangerous end of it. "That's right," said Mandy. "Just a few steps more. Come on." The puppy took another step. He was almost within reach. Mandy wanted to stretch out and grab him, but she knew that would be the wrong time to do it. If she missed, the puppy would panic and lose his balance. Mandy looked down at the heap of jagged floorboards and shelves and old cupboard doors. She shook her head. She wasn't going to risk it. The little animal took another step nearer. Mandy held her hand steady. She talked to him all the time in a soothing voice, encouraging him. "Not far now," she said. He was almost at her hand. He pressed his wet nose into her palm and sniffed. He gave her hand a little lick. "Good boy," said Mandy. "Come on, you can do it." At last, after a long pause, the puppy stepped forward and nuzzled Mandy's sleeve. Mandy put out both hands and clasped them firmly to her. There, she said, gathering him up. Now you're safe. The puppy looked up into her eyes, and Mandy frowned. This had to be Licorice. He just didn't feel like Blackie. Licorice? She said. The puppy gave a soft bark as if he recognized his name, but he still seemed a little frightened of Mandy. Mandy walked very carefully back along the wall and handed the puppy down to James. The little animal yelped and began to scrabble at James's chest, trying to get down. That settles it, said Mandy. This one must be Licorice. He doesn't recognize you at all. No, he doesn't, said James. He's trembling. Mandy slid over the bike shed roof and dropped to the ground. James looked down at the puppy shivering in his arms. Then he looked at Mandy, his eyes worried. Let's get him back to Sarah as quickly as we can, he said. Blackie must think we've abandoned him. I bet he's just as upset as Licorice right now.